Montana Territory. August 1877, the heat came off the plains like a furnace when Archer Gable reined in his horse beside the splintered fence post. Dust coated his boots and the brim of his hat, but it was not the heat or the broken wood that held his eyes still. It was her barefoot in the grass, dress hem swaying around her ankles, arms outstretched toward a baby boy wobbling on two chubby legs. The boy took one step, then crumpled into her arms with a burst of giggles. She laughed too, soft and bright, pressing a kiss to his cheek before standing him up again. Archer had seen many things in the scattered years since he'd left Texas behind gunfights, cattle drives, men dying in the dust, but nothing ever made his chest ache the way that sight did. She had not noticed him yet. He cleared his throat and stepped off his horse. "Ma'am," she turned fast, gathering the boy close, eyes sharp, then they widened. "You are standing on my fence line." Archer lifted his hands slightly. "Apologies, I thought it was abandoned." "It was," she said. "It isn't now." He glanced around. The house was small, its roof patched in places with what looked like old feed sacks. A coop leaned sideways behind it, and the barn had only 2 walls left. But the garden looked freshly hoed, and the clothesline held baby shirts fluttering in the dry wind. "I am Archer Gable," he said, tipping his hat. "I was passing through looking for work, saw the broken fence, thought maybe you could use a hand." Her mouth stayed in a firm line. "And you just offer help to strangers, only the ones teaching babies to walk." That made her blink. Then slowly her shoulders eased. She shifted the boy to her hip. "His name is Bo. I am Priscilla Hale. Nice to meet you, Priscilla." He looked down at Bo, who stared at him with wide brown eyes. "And you too, little man." Bo stuck a fist in his mouth and drooled. Priscilla huffed a little laugh. "Well, Mr. Gable, I cannot pay you, not in coin." "I am not asking for coin," he said. "Just a roof and a place to rest a while." She studied him. Archer stood still under that gaze, letting her see the wear in his clothes, the calluses on his hands, the sunburn at his collar. He had been riding for weeks. He had nothing but the saddle under him, a Bible he never read, and the guilt of years he would rather forget. "I have a spare cot in the barn," she said finally, "if you can fix it." "I will start with the fence," he said. That evening, the sun bleeding low across the hills, Archer hammered the last nail into the fence rail while Priscilla knelt in the dirt garden, tugging weeds. Bo sat beside her, slapping his hands against the soil. He laughed when she splashed water from a tin pail on his toes. Archer paused, leaning on the hammer. "You out here alone?" Priscilla wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Yes." "No husband," she shook her head. "He died last winter. Fever." "I am sorry." She did not answer. "How long you been out here?" She hesitated, then said, "Since spring." "My sister sent me the deed after I buried my husband, said it was all she could give. She had her own children to feed." Archer nodded slowly. "And you came out here with just Bo?" "There was no one else." He looked out at the horizon where the hills turned blue with distance. It was a hard land, a land that did not care if a woman was widowed or if a baby had no father. "You are brave," he said simply. She looked up, startled. "No. Just stubborn." "Sometimes those are the same thing." That night, Archer slept in the barn with the smell of hay and the creak of wind in the rafters. He dreamed of nothing. Just the sound of a baby laughing and the flash of Priscilla's smile when Bo took that step. By the end of the week, the fence was repaired, the coop was standing again, and the barn had a 4th wall. Archer built it from salvaged planks and a few wide boards he found behind the house. He worked quietly, only speaking when spoken to. But sometimes, when Priscilla let her guard down, she talked. She told him about Missouri, where she had grown up. About how she used to sing in church, though her voice had gone quiet since Bo was born. She told him about her husband, who had been kind but always sickly, and how the fever took him in 3 days. "You do not have to listen, you know," she said one evening after handing him a cup of coffee. "I want to," he said. She looked down at her hands. He added, "I reckon I have done enough not listening in my life." The next day, he found her setting Bo on his feet again near the garden. Bo took 2 wobbly steps toward her, then dropped. Archer smiled. He is getting better. I think he will run before he walks, she said, laughing. You need help, she hesitated. You want to try? Archer stepped forward, unsure. I never held a baby before. Well, she said, setting Bo on his feet and backing away. No time like now. Archer crouched, holding out his hands. Come on, Bo, Bo gurgled, blinking at him. Then with a serious look, he took one step, then another. Archer's eyes widened. He is walking. Priscilla smiled. Yes, and so are you. He looked up at her. Me, you are taking your first steps too, Archer. He stared at her, heart thudding. Then he laughed, caught Bo as he toppled forward and stood holding the boy against his chest. It had been years since anyone touched him without fear or anger. Bo curled against him like he belonged there. Priscilla watched them both, eyes soft. That night, after Bo was asleep, Priscilla stood on the porch, arms folded against the cooling air. Archer joined her, leaning against the railing. You could leave now, she said. The work is nearly done. I could. You will not, he looked at her, long and steady. Only if you want me to. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. I do not. He reached out slowly, brushing her hand with his. She let him. Then I will stay, he said, and in the silence that followed, something shifted, something quiet and deep and solid as the earth beneath them. Neither said another word, but both stayed standing there, side by side, until the stars blinked out across the sky. The morning mist clung low to the grass when Archer stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the softened earth. The barn door creaked behind him, wood swollen from the night's damp. In the east, the sky was turning a pale, slow gold. He carried a small bundle of kindling under one arm, gathered before dawn while the world was still hushed and watchful. Priscilla was already by the stove, sleeves rolled past her elbows, stirring something in a dented pot. She didn't startle when he stepped in. You were out early, she said without turning. I couldn't sleep. She nodded once. Heard coyotes last night. Close. I'll check the coop fence again today, he said. Might need to bury the bottom edge deeper. Use the shovel from behind the shed. The handle's cracked, but it'll hold if you grip it near the base. Bo sat on the floor nearby, fussing with a tin spoon, banging it against a wooden bowl. He gave a loud squeal when he saw Archer and held the spoon up like an offering. Archer crouched and took it, grinning. What is this? A trade? Priscilla glanced over, her mouth tugging upward just slightly. He's bribing you. Wants you to carry him. Is that so? Archer scooped Bo up, who squealed again and clapped his hands against Archer's chest. Well, he's got a good sense of negotiation. Priscilla moved to the hearth, ladled cornmeal into 2 cracked bowls. We've got enough of this to last through the week. After that, I'll need to ride into town. Archer balanced Bo on one hip. You ride alone. I have since spring. He didn't answer right away. Then, I'll go with you this time. She paused, her ladle hovering. You don't need to. I want to. Priscilla looked at him long enough that the room felt quieter. You'll need to shave, she said, turning back to the bowls. Archer rubbed his jaw, rough with days of growth. Fair enough. Bo wriggled, reaching for the bowl on the table. Priscilla set him down and slid his portion within reach. Archer sat beside him. You always cook like this, she shrugged. I learned watching my aunt. She couldn't read or write, but she could feed 10 people with a pot and a prayer. He nodded, eating without speaking. The food was simple but warm and filling. Afterward, he carried the bowls to the basin and began rinsing. Priscilla joined him, drying with a scrap of cloth. You ever been to Whitehorn? Couple years back. Just passed through, quiet place, dry. It hasn't changed, she said. The general store's slow to restock and the sheriff's half blind. Then we'll keep the trip quick. She looked toward the window. I don't like leaving the land too long. The gardens just started taking. I'll fix the coop fast, Archer said. Then we can leave at first light tomorrow. Her eyes flicked back to him. You're sure? He nodded. I've spent too long going nowhere. This feels different, like there's forward to it. She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered. That afternoon, Archer worked the spade through the hard-packed dirt behind the coop, sweat soaking through his shirt. Priscilla came around the side of the house with a tin cup, filled it from the bucket, and handed it over without a word. He drank deep. She shaded her eyes with one hand. "There's a man in town who used to know my husband. Name's Willard Price." Archer set the cup down. "Should I be worried? He liked to talk like he had claim on me," she said. "But he never did. Does he still? I think he wants to. I think he's hoping I'll be tired enough to settle for someone like him." Archer picked up the spade again. "Then it's good I'm going with you." She watched him for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the house. That evening, the wind shifted northward, carrying the scent of pine and damp stone. Archer sat on the porch steps, working a whetstone down the length of his knife. Priscilla came out with a small jar of salve and settled beside him, hands busy smoothing it over a patch of cracked skin near her thumb. He glanced sideways. "Rough day, garden soil's full of stone, not much give in it. You ever think about leaving?" She kept her eyes on her hand. "Sometimes. Then I look at Beau, and I remember I'm the only thing standing between him and the world." Archer ran the stone one last time along the blade before setting it aside. "You're doing more than standing. You're building." Priscilla folded her hands in her lap. "And you? What are you hoping to find here?" He studied the edge of the field where dusk had turned the grass silver. "I thought I'd lost the part of me that could belong anywhere, but out here, I don't know, there's something steady about this place." "About you?" She didn't speak, but her hand drifted toward his on the step, brushing against his knuckles. He turned his palm up, fingers curling slowly around hers. The silence between them wasn't empty. It held breath and warmth and something unspoken that neither was ready to name yet, but neither pulled away. Inside, Beau stirred in his sleep, a soft sigh through the open window. Archer looked toward it, then back at her. "I'll hitch the wagon before sunrise." Priscilla nodded. "Bring the rifle, just in case." He smiled with only his eyes. "Always." The stars came out quiet and slow. They stayed on the step until the chill reached their bones, and even then they rose together. They left before the sky fully broke, the wagon creaking beneath them as hooves pressed damp tracks into the dirt. Priscilla held the reins steady, her face unreadable under the wide straw hat she wore. Archer sat beside her, rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the edge of the tree line where the light hadn't yet chased the shadows. Beau slept in a padded crate tucked between their boots, wrapped in a quilt that had seen better years. The road to Whitehorn wasn't long, but it wound through hollow country, where cottonwood branches bowed low and strangers passed without names. "You always travel this road in silence?" Archer asked. Priscilla kept her gaze ahead. "No one to talk to, usually. You ever think about selling the land?" "Once." Her gloved hands tightened on the reins. "But it was never mine to give up. My sister sent it because our grandfather worked this soil. I'd be the last to let it go." Archer nodded slowly. "It's hard to hold on when the world keeps trying to take." She glanced at him, then back to the road. "You lost your land. I gave it up. After the war, couldn't walk those fields anymore without seeing who didn't come back." Her voice softened. "Union, Confederate. My brother didn't make it past Shiloh." They rode a while with only the wind in the grass and the wooden groan of the wagon bed. Then Priscilla said, "My father fought for the Union, died in Tennessee. I was still too young to understand why my mother stopped singing." Archer looked at her sidelong. "You think he'd mind you talking to someone like me?" She didn't hesitate. "I think he'd want me to survive." The town came into view as the sun cleared the hills, its buildings squat and gray with dust. The church steeple leaned slightly east, and the blacksmith's forge puffed thin smoke into the morning air. A dog trotted across the main street, tail low, ribs showing. Folks moved slow in Whitehorn, too used to loss to rush anything. Priscilla pulled the wagon beside the store's porch. "You take Beau. I'll get the supplies." Archer lifted the boy carefully, cradling him with one arm and stepping down. "You sure you trust me with him?" She handed him a small cloth bag. "If he fusses, give him the dried apple inside, and yes, I do." He watched her walk into the store, braids swinging against her back. Then he sat on the edge of the porch, Beau resting against his chest, warm and still half asleep. A man came around the corner, thick through the middle with a pressed vest and a hat too clean for farm work. His eyes narrowed when they landed on Archer. "That your boy?" "No," Archer said. "You're not from here." "No," Archer said again. The man stepped closer, gaze flicking to Bo. "That woman you came with, she's widowed." "Is that a question?" "She didn't belong to you." "Doesn't belong to anyone," Archer said flatly. The man's mouth twitched, eyes hard. "Name's Willard Price. I was close with her husband." Archer adjusted Bo's weight, not getting up. "Then you'll know she can handle herself." Willard paused, then gave a short grunt and walked off toward the saloon, boots kicking up dust. Inside the store, Priscilla moved with quiet certainty, listing items to the clerk without glancing toward the doorway. Archer watched through the dusty window as she slid coins across the counter, her shoulders drawn but not small. She didn't look back until she stepped outside with a sack under each arm. "Trouble?" she asked, eyeing the street. "Just a man who talks too much," Archer said. They loaded the wagon without speaking, and once back on the trail, Priscilla finally asked, "He say anything about me?" "He said you were widowed." "That's true." "He said he was close with your husband." "He was tolerated, nothing more," Archer nodded. "He won't bother you again." She looked over, then down at Bo, who was now chewing on the corner of the quilt. "You're good with him." "I didn't expect to be." "You want children?" He hesitated. "Never thought I'd be around long enough to raise one, but I like the quiet of it." "The smallness," she smiled faintly. "It isn't quiet very often." "I don't mean noise, I mean the way it slows you down, makes you look at things different." She was quiet a long time after that. Then she said, "I used to think survival meant being hard, tough. But lately I wonder if it's softer than I thought. Maybe survival's in the tending." The road stretched on ahead, the wagon wheels creaking in rhythm. Midday light shimmered off the grasslands, and somewhere in the wide silence between them, something settled. That night after supper, Priscilla stood on the porch with Bo in her arms, humming a low, sturdy tune while the last of the orange burned off the sky. Archer leaned against the post, arms folded. "You ever think about staying?" she asked without looking over. "I do now. You'd have to work the land." "I can do that." "You'd have to make room for another life, for more quiet." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I've lived loud long enough." She turned to him then, Bo's head against her shoulder, her eyes clear. "I'm not offering comfort. I'm offering roots. They don't grow easy." "I don't need easy," he said. "I need real." She reached out, slid her fingers into his. The touch wasn't uncertain it was chosen, and Archer, for the first time in years, didn't feel like he'd borrowed a moment. He felt like he belonged in it. The mornings came earlier now. The sun rose strong and sure, not with the pale hesitance of spring. Summer was settling deep into the earth, and the land had stiffened beneath its weight. Archer woke to the sound of a rooster calling out over the ridge and the rasp of Priscilla's footsteps in the yard below. He pulled on his shirt, still damp from yesterday's labor, and stepped into the light. She was tying up tomato vines with strips torn from an old petticoat. Bo sat in the shade of the well, chewing on a corn cob and humming to himself. "You've got a good hand for plants," Archer said, tugging his suspenders over his shoulders as he crossed to her. She didn't look up. "They only need water, son, and someone who doesn't give up on them." He crouched beside her and reached for the spool of twine. Same could be said for folks. Priscilla pressed her lips together like she wanted to speak and didn't. Instead, she leaned back on her heels and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "You ever think about building a root cellar?" he asked. "There's a hollow behind the barn," she said. "Dirt's soft there." "I just haven't had the time. I'll start digging after supper." She gave a small nod, then turned her attention back to the vine, threading the stem gently so it wouldn't snap. Later, while Bo napped in the cradle Archer patched with new rope, Priscilla sat at the table sewing a button onto one of his shirts. Archer stood at the counter, sharpening the hatchet for the woodpile. "Did you ever have a trade?" she asked without glancing up. "I did some smithing when I was younger, before the war." "Why didn't you stick with it?" It felt like a life for someone steadier than I was. She threaded the needle again. You seem steady now, he paused, blade in hand. That's because I've tied myself to something worth staying for. She didn't answer, but her hand stilled over the fabric. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just full. That evening, the two of them worked side by side behind the barn. Archer dug while Priscilla cleared the rocks he unearthed, stacking them neatly along the edge of the hollow. Sweat rolled down his back and the dirt clung to his skin. You don't have to help, he said, pausing to catch his breath. I know, she said, lifting another stone. But I want to. He looked at her, then hair pulled back, arms streaked with soil, eyes clear and determined. She wasn't made of fragility. She was made of bark and wind and the kind of faith that didn't need words. By the time the stars came out, the hollow was deep enough to hold a season's worth of root vegetables. They sat beside it, shoulders brushing, their boots caked with dried mud. You ever think about marrying again? Archer asked. Priscilla leaned her arms on her knees. I did once. When I first got here, I thought maybe if I could prove I could do it alone, then I wouldn't need to. And now, she turned her head, eyes resting on his. Now I don't feel alone. He reached over, slow and sure, and took her hand. I've got nothing to offer but my hands and my word. But I give both to you, she didn't pull away. That's more than most men ever promised me. The wind shifted cooler now and the scent of wild sage drifted through the grass. Beau's cry carried faintly from the house, thin and half-hearted. I'll go, Archer said, already rising. She nodded. He's probably just turned himself sideways again. Inside, Archer found Beau tangled in the blanket, feet kicking softly. He lifted him gently, pressed the boy to his chest, and rocked him near the window. Outside, the moon was climbing the ridge, silvering the tops of the trees. He didn't notice Priscilla come in until he turned and found her watching from the doorway. You're good with him, she said softly. I didn't know I could be. She stepped closer, her voice quieter still. It matters to me, the way you care for him. He matters to me, Archer said. You both do. She reached out, placing her palm against Beau's back where it rested against Archer's chest. Her fingers brushed his shirt, and he felt the weight of that touch in his ribs. I want a life built slow, she said. One that lasts through winters and lean years. Archer looked at her, every part of him steady. Then let's build it together. She nodded once, and that was the promise. No fireworks, no grand declarations, just two people who had weathered too much to waste a moment pretending. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting a soft orange glow. Archer passed Beau into her arms, then reached to close the shutters. The night air had deepened, but inside it was warm. When he turned back, she was watching him not with question, but with certainty. He crossed the space between them and kissed her, slow and sure, his fingers brushing her cheek where the firelight touched her skin. She leaned into him, her breath warm against his collarbone. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the garden leaves. But inside the house, the world was still. They had no need to speak. Everything they needed had been said. The final days of summer settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as the wind that combed through the tall grass. Archer rose early, before the rooster crowed, and walked the perimeter of the land with Beau nestled against his chest, in a sling Priscilla had sewn from flour sack cloth. He checked for signs of skunk near the coop, watched the tree line for movement, and returned just as the light touched the porch rail. Priscilla had taken to humming again, not the songs from her childhood, but small melodies she made under her breath without thinking, usually while shelling beans or mending the seams of Archer's sleeves. She didn't seem to notice she was doing it, and he never told her. It felt like something private, and he wanted her to keep it. They built the root cellar together, stacking stone and tamping earth until it stood steady and cool beneath a thick timbered door. Archer shaped shelves from scrap cedar, and Priscilla lined them with jars of pickled squash, wild currants, and the last of the spring rhubarb. On a morning thick with dew, Archer found her kneeling by the cedar tree near the eastern fence, pressing a folded scrap of linen into the soil. When she stood, he saw her fingers were ringed with dirt and her eyes looked back at him without apology. I buried his watch here, she said. It stopped the day he died. I always meant to leave it in a place that would hold something new. He nodded once, understanding without needing to ask. You think he'd mind? She asked. No, Archer said. I think he'd want you to be loved. That night, Priscilla brought out 2 iron candlesticks she'd kept wrapped in a wool blanket since Missouri. They were blackened with age and bent slightly at the base, but she set them on the table and lit them both, the flames flickering against the wood walls. I saved these for when something felt like home again, she said as she placed a hand on Archer's shoulder. He looked around the room at the crib he'd built, the patched curtains she'd sewn, the worn rug he'd traded for in town, and he realized it already was. Then maybe it's time, he said. The next week, they rode into Whitehorn again, not for supplies, but to sign their names in thin ink in the back of Reverend Alby's marriage book. The ceremony was short and plain, with the preacher's wife holding bow and the wind rattling the shutters. Priscilla wore a dress she'd let down at the seams, and Archer had sewn a button back onto his cleanest shirt the night before with clumsy thread. Afterward, they sat on the porch of the store and shared a wedge of molasses cake wrapped in waxed paper. You nervous? She asked, tearing off a piece. No, he said. This is the first thing in a long while that doesn't feel borrowed. She leaned against his arm and they ate the rest of the cake in silence. Back at the homestead, Priscilla moved her things from the front room to the bedroom, folding her garments beside his. Archer added another hook to the wall for her shawl. The cot in the barn stayed empty. Autumn began to show itself in the edges of the leaves. Priscilla planted winter greens in the garden, and Archer sealed the windows against the coming cold. Beau started toddling in earnest, his steps quick and uneven, hands reaching for anything to steady himself. Archer made him a small wooden cart with wheels that squeaked and a handle just the right height. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Archer sat on the porch carving a toy horse from a block of pine. Priscilla stepped out, an envelope in her hand. It's from my sister, she said, offering it to him. He took it, turning it over. Good news, she's had another child. A girl this time. She asked if we'd come visit next spring. He nodded. We will, you sure? I want Beau to know his family, and I want your people to know I'll never leave you standing alone. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his ribs. I already knew that. When the first frost came, they brought the last of the apples into the cellar and strung dried herbs above the hearth. Archer began teaching Priscilla how to shoot with the rifle, her hands steady as stone, her aim improving each day. I want to be ready, she said once, if ever there's a need. There won't be, Archer said, but I like knowing you could knock a tin can off the fence from 20 paces. She laughed, the sound soft and low, and kissed him before she pulled the trigger again. By the time the snow came, they had a system. Archer chopped wood while Priscilla boiled beans and baked oat cakes. Beau took to crawling under the table, dragging his quilt behind him like a shadow. On the coldest days, they huddled together on the rug before the fire, Priscilla's back against Archer's chest, Beau asleep between them. One night, as wind howled against the shutters and sleet tapped the roof like spilled grain, Archer reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a folded handkerchief. Inside was a silver ring, plain but polished, engraved with their initials. I found it at the trader's stand in Whitehorn a week after we got back, he said. I wanted to wait till the right moment. She looked down at it, then back at him. This is the right moment. He slid it onto her finger, and she held his face in her hands and kissed him until the shadows on the wall faded into nothing. Years later, folks in Whitehorn would talk about the woman who turned a broken plot of land into a place that grew more than crops. They'd mention the man who came from nowhere and stayed through every storm, who built toys for the children and repaired every fence in the valley without asking for thanks. But none of that mattered to Archer and Priscilla. What mattered was the weight of her hand in his as the seasons turned. What mattered were the quiet mornings and the firelit nights, the sound of Beau's laughter echoing off the hills, and the knowledge that they had built a life not from what they lost, but from what they chose. And in that life, there was no more wandering, only home.